So, welcome back to Free and Alive podcast. Now, we are in March and we are days away from the annual celebration that witnesses have, which is the memorial. And of course, anyone who's been a witness knows that that's the only thing they ever celebrate. And to call it a celebration or a party of any kind is not really accurate. However, because the memorial is coming up, especially if you're someone who has stopped going, has faded, or someone whose family really want to see you back in the organization, maybe reinstated, you will be getting some messages, you will be getting well-meaning messages from witnesses inviting you to the memorial. And you might not want to go. So then that puts you in a little bit of a difficult situation, how to respond. What do you think, Quinn? How would you handle an unwanted memorial invitation?
That's kind of hard because if you're dealing with a witness that doesn't know your position of you knowing it's a false religion, they act like the memorial is a sin, that you must be there.
Mm.
And so it's kind of hard to give an excuse that they're going to accept because they think that you need to be there. And I remember when I was a witness that during the memorial, we'd always visit inactive people to invite them to the memorial. And I think sometimes that would even be in the information for the midweek meeting when they have parts in the memorial of invite those who haven't been to the meetings and active ones, search them out. So yeah, they really try to get you to go, and it's hard to come up with an excuse that they're going to accept. I remember that the last memorial that would have been my last memorial if I had attended was my ex-wife when we were married. I was already inactive, like I was not going to meetings, and she already knew I was having doubts about the religion, but she really thought like I'm going to still go to the memorial, and I was going to go just to please her, but I really didn't want to go. But once I found out some other stuff about the memorial, then I didn't even go, and it was tough to tell her that I wasn't going because she's thinking like I'm committing the unforgivable sin. So I would say my best advice is if you have witness family members that are going to ask you, my best advice is just avoid them during this time because you know they're going to invite you. So I mean that's one piece of advice.
So one thing you could say is uh just not respond. That's a response in itself. Or you could say something like, "Oh wow, that's come around quickly. I'm sorry I can't make it," or "I'm not available." You don't have to give a reason. Just you can just say you're not available, but thank you for the invite. Thank you for thinking of me. There's always ways to be gracious if you want to, if you need to maintain some kind of relationship with those individuals. I think it's good to just kind of play it situation by situation. But there is some very curious things about the Jehovah's Witness Memorial, and I think both you, Quinn, and myself have uncovered a lot of interesting things about it since we left, and in your case, even before you kind of officially left Witnesses, you already started to find out things about the memorial. So I can say that from a very, because I was born into a witness family, from a little girl, I used to feel a lot of anxiety around the memorial. That whole time period was stressful. We'd be going out of our way to invite all the magazine route calls and return visits. We'd be going out of our way to invite people to the memorial, maybe work colleagues, school friends. There was this real pressure to get as many people as possible to this gathering. Then you were to wear your best clothes, you were to behave a certain way. I remember being very anxious about dropping the plate or dropping the wine glass. There's so much anxiety around the whole thing. And I used to be very nervous, even though the whole thing lasts less than an hour. I used to feel very, very nervous all day and through it. And I wouldn't really feel better until the next day. So once I left Witnesses, I uncovered some really quite horrendous stuff linked to the memorial, which I think will come as a surprise to a lot of people. But it's not unusual that people leave the Witnesses and over time they come to the conclusion there's something quite wrong about the whole thing.
Yeah, and I remember a story. Let me know if I'm jumping ahead too much, but so one of my last memorials that I did attend was on Zoom, and so right before the meeting's about to start, there was this sister that had an unbelieving husband. So for some reason, her microphone or her Zoom unmuted herself, like she somehow by accident. So she started telling her husband off, and she was like pointing at other people on Zoom and saying, "Sister so and so's husband, he's sitting with her. Her husband sitting with her. Why are you not supporting me?" And she just like going off on this guy. And on Zoom, if you have it on speaker view, then when you talk, you're big on the screen. That's what people are looking at. So everyone just got quiet, and she just going off and off and off because, um, like before the Zoom meeting, everyone was talking because they were unmuted, so they're all greeting each other. But her thing was on mute because she was telling her husband off, and somehow it unmuted, and she just started telling her husband off, and it just set this real negative tone, like really just I can't explain it, but it didn't seem godly at all that God's spirit was anywhere with the memorial. And it was just like, and a lot of times weird stuff like that would happen. And another thing weird would be was every memorial, it seemed like there's just things going wrong. Like, oh, I worked extra late. I got held up at work, so I'm rushing. I'm not going to make it. Or, oh, I forgot to fill the gas tank up and we got to stop and get gas first. Or like just, maybe you got sick. Like it seemed like there's always this force stopping you from going. And I always believed that it's Satan. And sometimes other witnesses would say the same thing. Oh, yeah, Satan was trying to stop me because Satan is the boogeyman to Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what he is. Like he's responsible for everything. If you get fired from your job, Satan did it. If you're late, Satan did it. Satan does everything. Anything go up, it's Satan. It almost like Satan is in everybody's life all the time. Like just it's weird, but anyway, so Satan gets blamed for everything. So anyway, when it comes to this memorial thing, yeah, like, things would always go wrong, and I was always taught to believe like, yep, Satan is mad. The devil is trying to stop you from going. And now that I look back at it, yeah, it was probably like if you believe in guardian angels or good spirits, whatever you view as believe, like it's probably a good force that's stopping us from attending it. But it was always a weird experience. And I never enjoyed it because usually in most cases, you're sharing the Kingdom Hall with another congregation. And they have this thing where the full moon, like what is it, has got to be before the sun goes down. It's like very ritualistic, like the timing. So like you're rushing in and out. Like you can't start it at a certain time. Like what is it, the before the sun goes down or something? And then like the other congregation is rushing in. So it's like a circus. I don't know. Like it was never enjoyable. I never enjoyed it. Um, yeah, I don't know, but that's just some of the weird things that I've experienced, like with it before I found out some of the dark ties to it.
And I can echo that because I had weird things go wrong with my car, especially the last few years that I was in the organization. Everything seemed to be trying to get me to not go. And you made a good point. In the world of witnesses, Satan is really powerful. He gets talked about a lot. He gets credited with a lot. If only Jehovah and Jesus were even halfway as powerful as Satan. That's kind of the impression you end up getting. But once I left witnesses, there's some really interesting things that I discovered. One thing that I learned was that actually the Bible doesn't say anywhere that you should not partake of the communion. And the early Christians would frequently do communion. That's really what the biblical word for it would be. So they would partake in the memorial, the commemoration of Jesus' death. I'm going to call it communion because that's the normal word to use. And in the Bible, especially from like Acts, Romans, and the letters, it will quite frequently talk about the early Christian congregation, brothers and sisters, getting together, having a meal, and breaking bread. So if you look at any other Bible translation, it will talk about breaking bread regularly. Now, that is always a reference to them having done a prayer and taken part in the wine and the bread as a communion. So communion was done frequently. And Jesus did say, as often as you do this in my remembrance. He didn't say do it once a year. That's completely like an additional thing. And there's even a verse that says in the Bible that unless you partake, you are not saved. So that's also kind of interesting. If the Bible says very clearly you're not saved unless you partake, why would the organization go out of its way of telling everybody present to not partake, to reject the wine that represents the blood and the bread that represents Jesus' body and the sacrifice he's given? So fast forward me leaving the organization, and I read a really fascinating life story of someone who was a Satanist who became a Christian. And she tells you about her life as a Satanist. And she explains in one chapter about a celebration called the Black Mass or the Black Sabbath. You might have heard about the heavy metal band Black Sabbath. We all know Ozzy Osbourne, but that name of the band is based on a real celebration. It is the most important date in the calendar for Satanists and occultists and witches. And they will, on that day, have a celebration where they mock Jesus. They reject Jesus, mock him, and declare that Satan has victory. Very twisted celebration, involves a lot of drugs, blood and human sacrifices, orgies, nasty, nasty stuff. But they all do it knowing what they're part of. And it always falls on the same day as the Jehovah's Witness Memorial. It always falls on the date of the Jehovah's Witness Memorial, Nisan 15th. It is always the day of the Black Sabbath. So if you're picking up on that day, if you're sensitive spiritually, you're feeling anxious and stressed on that day, it is because there's a lot of demonic activity. Now, how does that relate to the Jehovah's Witness Memorial? Well, the Jehovah's Witness Memorial is also a ritualistic rejection of Jesus Christ. It is cleverly presented as something different. It is presented as, oh, this one day we focus on what Jesus did. No, they don't. The talk is about how it's important that you use wine, a certain type, and bread that's unleavened. And it's important that you don't partake. Unless you're very, very special, you don't partake. So they encourage everybody there present to reject Jesus. Imagine that. They want you to lose your salvation. They want you to curse yourself. They want you to curse Jesus by rejecting him. That's really twisted and it's very dark. And also they've managed to convince people that is the most important thing to do each year. So when you understand the spiritual significance of the memorial, if you do attend, just notice how you feel. Notice the atmosphere. Notice what they say and what they don't say. And make up your mind, you know. I think it's something to just consider, you know, just observe it and observe the weirdness of it. And why would they go against every single Christian tradition that existed for thousands of years? It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, and just proof to something I thought about recently, proof that the rejection is very ritualistic and deliberate is because how, again, they make everybody touch it to reject it. But what proves this is that some could argue and say, oh, well, you have to touch it to pass it to the next person because maybe they want it, but you already know nobody's going to really do it anyway. But if you look at it carefully, after they pass it around to everyone, someone will then pass it to the speaker just for him to touch it. Well, why? And then if they pass it to the speaker because maybe they don't know if he's of the anointed, right? Okay, so what comes first? Is it the bread that comes first or the wine? I can't recall which one they do first. But whatever one they do first. The point is when they pass it once, you already know the speaker because he already rejected the bread or whatever one came first. So they know that. So then when you pass the second one, it might be the wine, it's the second one. I don't know, but then you already know the speaker is going to reject it because you already passed them the bread and he rejected that because he's not going to heaven, apparently. But they have it arranged where you still got to pass it to him again. Well, why? Because he's got to touch it to reject it. It's very deliberate. And even after all the people that are in the rows passing, like passing it to the different rows and switching rows, like usually have servants do that. Then when they're done, they stand like a ritualistic line and they pass it amongst each other. So it's very like if you go to the memorial, for anyone that's going to go, pay attention to that and how even after they pass it to everybody, they make sure that all the people that were passing it that they touch it again to reject it. Then they pass it to the speaker. Then they do the whole charade again with the next one that's passed. So there's something significant. They want you to touch it to reject it. And even people that they invite that don't have the same beliefs as Jehovah's Witnesses, they know the majority of the people that they invite are not going to partake because they're going to look like the weirdo. So they're going to see, oh, we don't partake here. So they're going to reject it too. They're not going to go there and take it. Most of them aren't. So those are the weird things to pay attention to. And then when you really look at the Bible account, Jesus didn't say anything like that. He didn't say invite everybody in town and everybody's got to touch it. And Jehovah's Witnesses will start to try to explain it. They'll say, well, no, it's because Jesus made a covenant, this and that. He didn't say nothing about a covenant. He basically set his disciples down and he was showing them, listen, do this. And it could have been just them because he was giving them the instructions to what to pass on to keep doing it. Like, this is what we're going to do. So here, take it. This is what you do. He didn't say anything about 144,000 and only those with the 144,000. Like all of that is JW like made up stuff. And when witnesses try to explain it, that's when they start quoting the Watchtower. They can't show you that in the Bible. They'll just start quoting the Watchtower. Well, Jesus was making a covenant and this and that and 144,000. Jesus didn't say anything about 144,000. And 144,000 is one of those things where I'm not sure if there's any other book in the Bible that mentions that number. I'm not sure, but as far as I know, I think it's only in the Revelation that they mention that number. And Jehovah's Witnesses built a whole empire off of that one scripture. 144,000, that can mean anything, but to them that means only us chosen people are going to heaven. Of course, the governing body, they're all in that number. And the rest of you aren't part of that number, but you still have to go to the memorial. You have to be there just so we can pass it to you to reject it. You must do that. But is it in the Bible? No, it's completely made up. So the thing too is that when you understand Satanists and people that are doing dark stuff, everything has meaning. So when you see all these weird things, it is good to really ask yourself, what's the purpose of that? Because one thing about darkness is darkness needs to hide in the dark. Light is not afraid of anything. So if something is pure worship, it's not secretive. Everything should make sense. This is why we do that. This is why everybody's got to. But when you have all these weird things and no one really knows why, oh, but we have to we got to touch it just because, I don't know what, but we got to do it. There's something dark to it. We just don't know what it is.
I agree that the way in which they insist that everybody touches the glass and touches the plate and yet passes it on, like you said, that's a ritualistic thing. And why insist on it? Why? If you're not meant to be doing it, actually. Yeah, so I'd agree that that's extremely a big red flag. If for some reason you feel you need to go or you wish to go, partake. That's going to really annoy them and rile them. Partake, because I think that's putting two fingers up at the ritual. So I think that would be a good way to go. They can't say anything because it's meant to be so dignified. They'll just glare at you and talk about you afterwards, but they will anyway, most likely, especially if you've left or you haven't been going for a while. The other thing I would say is do some research, read the Bible again from Matthew onwards. I got to chapter 5 and I read chapter 5 and the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus frequently said that the reward for the righteous is the kingdom of heaven. He didn't say kingdom on earth, paradise on earth. He said kingdom of heaven. And he also said, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. So he said that to his disciples. He said, come to heaven. There's loads of room. And when he said, I have other sheep that are not of this fold, he was talking about the Gentiles, because the Gentiles were going to be brought in quite quickly. So he's preparing his really quite snobby Jewish people that, hey, not only is there a lot of space in heaven, we're going to welcome all the nations. So you guys need to get mentally ready to welcome others. And the whole taking that figure from the Revelation book where it's mentioned twice, again, if it was an important teaching, it would be throughout the Bible. Jesus would have talked very clearly about it. He didn't ever say not everyone should partake. The only thing the Bible says is if you have a sin you haven't confessed, you should basically pray about it first, then you can partake. That was the only limitation scripturally, that you should first pray. And the interesting thing is when they do it in churches, and they do it quite frequently, they don't force it on people. They do the prayer at the front and they say, anybody who wants to partake and do it, come and help yourself. The table is here and we've got, you know, the little things, and you can take it or not. It's not, nobody's forcing you. It's something you can either do or not. So it's a very different kind of thing. But yeah, I would say be alert to the weirdness of it, and just bear that in mind when you make that decision. Don't let yourself be bullied into going. Nobody should bully you into going. That should be your own free choice.
Yeah, and one more point I thought too, just to backtrack a little bit, is that so in the average congregation, nobody partakes. You have one or two sometimes, but usually nobody does. And when you do, they count that, like they take note of that. So they're trained too to count that. So they know if you take. So once you pass, and I could have it backwards, but I think they pass the bread first. I just have this feeling that because I remember being afraid of spilling the glass of wine, so I felt like the wine was second for some reason. But whatever comes first, I think the bread comes first. But once they pass the bread and nobody takes it, then you already know nobody's going to take the wine, right? Because it's not like you take one but not the other. Like if you're supposedly of the anointed, which Jehovah's Witnesses believe, you take both. So in most cases, you see nobody even takes the bread. So then why do you even do the same thing with the wine? You could still talk about the wine and put it on the table, but why do they then say, okay, now we're going to offer, like if everybody's rejected it, you already know they're not going to take it, but why do it? They have to do it. It's part of their ritual. Um, and again, like just to touch on what you were saying, Samantha, is that none of that is in the Bible. None of it's in the Bible. And that's their most important day. How is your most important day of the year not biblical at all? It's not.
Exactly. And I would even go as far as saying, if a bunch of you go to the memorial and start sipping the wine, they're going to run out real quick because they only buy one bottle, right? And they do try and make it quite a good one, so you could taste some lovely wine. And spiritually, what the teaching around the memorial / communion is in the Christian world is that it is the single most powerful act of putting two fingers up at Satan that you can partake in. Because every time you sip that wine and you take a piece of that bread, you are declaring that Jesus Christ is King. He has given you salvation and Satan is finished. Okay. Every single time you partake of the communion, you are saying, yes, Jesus has done it. Jesus has become the victor. So why on earth would witnesses not want to do that? Why on earth would they not want us all to be declaring Jesus Christ victory over Satan by partaking? Interesting, isn't it? It just makes you think, whose children are running the organization? Is it children of God or is it children of the devil?
Well, that's an easy question, but
We'll let you answer it yourself.
basically, it's very clear to me that it is demonic, and yeah, uh, and they really want you to go there, and they really want you to touch it. They really want you there. That's another question to ask too: is why are they so desperate to invite everybody to that? For what? Um, yeah.
Maybe they get some kind of brownie points. Like we have managed to now damn 8 million souls. And the ones that partook, well, we just collateral, to keep up the, facade that some people are special and those special people can call the shots and control you. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting the way they try to get as many people to attend. I do think they must be getting something from it on some spiritual level. Thankfully, you and I, Quinn, we've never been Satanists, and we have stayed well away from that kind of thing because we were good witnesses and we didn't delve into the supernatural stuff. Everything I've learned since leaving, God has revealed to me through Christians that have been saved. So again, it's a safe source. I haven't got this information from somebody who's still involved in the occult, but rather people that have left it behind and are now Christians and have been cleansed from all of that. But they will share this information because you know what the Bible says? The Bible says that we are not ignorant of what Satan does. But it does also say in the book of Hosea, it says, there's a lament in there, which is that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And that verse is sometimes used to explain why a lot of Christians are ignorant. They don't know these things and they don't understand that it's important to know some of this stuff. So we're in a spiritual battle, not with people. We never have to fight other individuals, other people. Our battle is with the wicked, unseen forces. So it's quite important to be alert to this stuff.
Yeah, and this is kind of off subject a little bit, but I was just thinking how when I first became a witness, I've always asked the elders, like, what do you guys do with the wine after? And nobody could give me a straight answer. So I'm just thinking, some elders getting drunk off of that after, who's not of the anointed, but that's just a little fun fact I wanted to throw out there that they wouldn't tell me. Nobody would give me a straight answer on what did they do with the wine after.
And I have to say that because I left during lockdown, my last memorial was the first lockdown memorial at home. I bought Jewish matzos because they're unleavened, and I discovered that if you put butter on them, they're really tasty. So I ate the whole packet. I managed to save a little piece for the memorial. I bought an extremely nice wine. I had the same question as you, what to do with the wine. So the wine that I had in the glass for my little mini celebration at home, I poured down the sink because I thought I can't drink that glass, but I made sure that I drank the rest of that bottle over a Zoom call with a friend that evening. And because I then spent time with a friend chatting and having some wine, it was hands down the best memorial I've ever had as a witness because I didn't need to go to the stressful Kingdom Hall experience. I did it at home and I was able to do something fun afterwards. So I think it was a nice way to ease out of it. I now understand that if I were ever to attend one, I would partake for a start, and I just don't recommend it unless you want to observe it in action and just watch it play out. I don't recommend going. There's nicer ways to spend your evening than in a demonic ritual.
So I think we pretty much covered most of it. That yeah, a lot of things to keep in mind when it comes to this thing that they're so obsessed to get you to go to. They're so obsessed they need you there. They want you to touch their emblems. They got to have you touch them.
Yeah. So anyway, if you do, let us know what you decide to do. Let us know what you think about some of the things that we talked about in this episode that focuses on the memorial.